I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Schulte, here. Mr. Loring, here. Mr. Helmers, here. Mr. DeBoer, here. I am here. First, we would look at the agenda for February 4.
Any changes or anything?
I don't have any.
Motion on the agenda.
Support it.
Any discussion concerning the agenda as it was posted? Hearing none, those in favor of approval of the agenda signify with aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Next, we would look at the minutes from our previous meeting, of January 29.
One on the 19th is 8 o'clock.
Yes. Yep. Maggie said it only lasts like 15 minutes, so before you recess to go into the assessors, so we should be good.
Make a motion to approve.
Support.
Motion by Warren, support from Helmers for approval of the January 29 minutes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Next item is considering a pay increase for county attorney's legal assistant and victim witness coordinator. Want to invite her and hear from her, or do you want to discuss it further? Do you have something prepared you want to share?
Yeah. Okay. So, as the only person in like the support staff in my office, I came to say to you guys that I feel like I'm not quite getting compensated as fairly as I should. I juggle very many tasks, especially in these last 6 months that no one has been helping out as the interim county attorney. I understand that that's something that hopefully won't be for very long so that we can get an attorney. But I do take like a lot of hats and everything. I'm a legal assistant. I'm the victim witness coordinator that handles getting everybody prepped for trials, just like on a day-to-day with any victims, law enforcement, all our witnesses that we have to call for trial or just that we have to have come in. I try to do my best with fine collections, as no one has previously mentioned. That's not something that is top on my list to get done, but I do, as they come in, try to set people up for payment plans and whatnot. I just feel like something else could be done for me, possibly some sort of raise or bringing in some part-time help to kind of alleviate some of that thing so that other things can be looked at in detail. We have had more serious criminal cases these last months, even years as I've been here. I've really learned a lot from Nolan and from reaching out to other counties to see what they do. I just have a lot on my shoulders right now, and as things are looking, I don't think we're going to be getting an attorney hired very soon, and so I'm going to have to be dealing with everything that I do for a while. So.
What is your wage right now?
It is at 46,000. I'm not exactly sure on the number.
It's already the 46,500 right now.
Something like that, yeah. 46.
6/8/21, projected to go to 48/4/60 in July.
Yeah.
And I guess I would just add that, you know, what Elizabeth does with fine collection, we all know that if we had more dedicated, specific staff that did just fine collection or had that as their primary duty, not to say that Elizabeth is dedicated, because she certainly is, that number would go up. And I'd also say, even if that number hasn't been exactly where we wanted in the past years, since October of 2023, we've tried 4 major felony child sex abuse cases. Not only do those cases take up literally hundreds of my hours of work, they also take up a huge portion of what Elizabeth does because she notifies witnesses, schedules depositions, drafts pleadings that I review, provides updates to law enforcement, social workers, staff in those cases, attends court when able to provide support, communicates with clerks, court staff on things. And those are a big part of the reason why maybe some of our fine collection numbers haven't been quite where we want them. But the reality is that every time, you know, she brings $1 in, depending on how you slice it, 5 to 10% of that goes to the county. That's money that she's bringing in. And I was pleasantly surprised to hear from Rochelle how much money we have in our county attorney incentive fund compared to even last year at this time. So I realized that for a long time there has been discussion about giving the legal assistant in my office a raise that would more closely approximate what the higher level deputies in other offices get. And I'm not here to put down any of the work that anybody else does in those offices. But what I would say is what Elizabeth does is at least as complex and crucial to this county as you know, what is done in other offices. And that's not, again, to make a judgment on what other offices do, but it's my reasoned understanding of what goes on in this office after having worked there for almost 8 years now. What Elizabeth does every day is incredibly important to the county because, as you probably all figured out over the past several months, even when I was just representing Osceola County, I was in court 2 or more days a week. That's time I can't answer the phone. That's time I can't be available to talk to people. That's time that people need to take messages from me, or time that Elizabeth would have to just work on something that's time sensitive because I'm not there. Now that has increased, and I don't know what the prospects are for getting a new county attorney. And you have to look at the possibility that this is something that she'll be doing for some time. Even if you hire somebody and are fortunate enough to hire somebody who has significant experience working as a county attorney, there will be an onboarding period. There will be a period of time when they do not get how we do things here, how courts work here, how the specifics of everything works here. I learned that in Lyon County, and that's just one county over. So there's going to be a significant period of time, no matter what, even if you hire somebody tomorrow, that Elizabeth is still doing more than her share. But even if she's just doing her share, she goes above and beyond routinely. She still deserves a raise because of what she does for this office, for this county. And I would just say, you know, if there's a day that Elizabeth's not on the ball, things suffer. And that's not necessarily the case with her because she is great at being consistent, being on time, being available. And I would also add that in these past 6 months, you know, there have been times where I've had to call Elizabeth via email or phone to ask her questions after work hours. That's something that I have always tried to avoid with legal assistance. The way I look at it, if I'm getting phone calls at 2 a.m. about something that's happening, that's just how this works in my job. But she shouldn't be getting those phone calls, and I certainly am not calling that late, but the whole point is, once it's 4:30, I have always tried to avoid calling my legal assistant or asking my legal assistant for help for things. Given how things have been the past 6 months, that hasn't been the case. That's probably going to continue as long as there's 2 counties to work for, and as long as you guys don't have a full-time county attorney. Anybody that serves as your interim is going to be doing that. So what I would say is, you know, this is kind of a situation where the need for Elizabeth to receive additional compensation is above and beyond where it's been in past years. And you ultimately want to talk about doing things that help retain staff by quality compensation. I can't, certainly tell you what Elizabeth's future plans are, but it would be very harmful to the operation of this office if at a time when you are searching for a county attorney, you had to be concerned that the only legal assistant in the office might seek other employment. And again, I'm not speaking for Elizabeth, but that's just as somebody who is managing the office, I have to think about. I guess another thing I would say is that, ultimately, whoever the next county attorney is going to want to know that their staff is properly compensated. And once again, if it is a concern about the amount of fine collection, I would just say we should explore having somebody who works part-time who does fine collection. And I would also be willing to explore, to the extent that it's available, given the current state of federal funding, a Violence Against Women Act grant to fund the victim witness coordinator position part-time. Whether or not that's something that's available going forward in Iowa or the rest of the country, no one can say at this point. But what I would say is that not only should you certainly consider compensating Elizabeth above and beyond what her projected raise is, it would also be very helpful if in the future you looked to hire somebody part-time to at least collect fines.
I'd like a little time to think about this. I don't want to make a snap decision. But that's just me.
Yeah, I think some review is necessary, but it's also budget time would be the time to plug those numbers in and know where we stand.
We're going to be looking at that for a few more days.
I mean, no disrespect to the position, but
No.
we've transitioned these types of positions before without special pay or that altering the overall pay. And I would see more value to finding additional part-time staff to address some of those areas identified. Might be an approach that would most interest me, I guess, but no comments? No.
Numbers she looking at herself.
You,
You have
I don't have a
mine.
specific number in mind. No.
We previously talked, and we talked about how maybe asking this year to be at the point of the first, deputy of a different, courthouse department might not be a realistic ask, but in the future, approaching that and somewhere in between there, maybe for this year would be realistic. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, just in general, that's kind of, if you look at what first deputies and other officers are getting, I think Elizabeth is asking for something between what her projected raises and what those salaries are.
But then you'd like to raise up to that plus maybe another part-time person.
That would certainly be ideal. Obviously, we understand that sometimes adjusting these things takes time. But what I would say is that, I have had conversations with other counties around here, and I look at their populations. Like, for instance, yes, Lyon County has twice the population that we have here in Osceola County. But they have 2 full-time legal assistants, part-time victim witness coordinator, and they have 1 intern in the office 4 days out of the week who can do most tasks. We've been fortunate that we're gonna now have an intern in the office, an unpaid intern for 2 hours a week. But that's 2 hours a week
Is that here or over there?
here. And that person is a high schooler who has an interest in a legal career. Right? And that's great. Like, we've never done that before, ever since I've been here, and I don't even know if that happened when Bob was here. That's 2 hours a week. And you have one full-time employee who's here full-time, and you guys don't know when you're gonna have an attorney in the office. And so, you know, you look over at Palo Alto, they have one full-time legal assistant, a part-timer who does victim witness, fine collection, that sort of thing, and a quote-unquote part-time county attorney who works 30 to 40 hours a week, and a full-time assistant county attorney. Palo Alto has 9,000 people. So you start to look at staffing levels and say, is it realistic that we're gonna have 2 full-time attorneys in the office in Osceola? No, it's not. Are there counties that are about our size that have, in terms of staffing equivalents, hours per week, 1.5 county attorneys in the office? There are, but that's more expensive by a good amount than having one full-time legal assistant and a part-time legal assistant who does fine collections and actually adds value in direct dollars. Because when you start talking about hiring an additional part-time county attorney, those costs are significantly more, because usually when you say part-time county attorney or part-time assistant, you're not paying that person directly half the salary of what you would pay a regular county attorney or assistant county attorney, because functionally, from what I've seen, you're not attracting quality applicants to that position at all. If you just pay for 20 hours a week, most of them get compensated with the understanding they're gonna work 30 or 40 hours a week. You look at realistic salaries for that gets significantly more expensive than what we're asking about. So I do think it would really ideally be fair to increase Elizabeth's salary and then hire somebody part-time. And you'd be talking about realistically hiring somebody part-time at somewhere between, I would say, $22,000 and $28,000 a year, max maybe 30, with benefits to be determined. That's a cost savings, and in the long run, I just think that's a more sustainable approach to a county attorney's office. I think Elizabeth does a great job. I've worked really hard to improve things in the office in the time that I've been there. I would give credit to Jace for coming in and helping modernize our approaches in terms of digitizing things, getting us on systems that make this a more modern office, that make it more sustainable, decrease time inputting data, moving data, all that, getting the push for Carpel. That big part of that was Jace. Certainly I had a hand in that. You know, in terms of my involvement here, you know, hey, you know, like Mitzi was in here on the ground floor in terms of my involvement in making sure that office ran. Like, credit to all those people. But what I'll say is that now that I've been over in Lyon and there's a greater staffing level, there is an organizational, not calm, but being ahead of the game that we simply cannot sustain here in Osceola. Now granted, we've had more major felonies in Osceola over the past 2 years than they certainly have had in Lyon. I can tell you that looking at the dockets. And those things create difficulties because of the amount and volume of time they take. But realistically, day in, day out over a long time period, having greater staffing levels like they have there brings about a consistency to what's going on and an ability to stay ahead of what's going on in court and not have those difficulties that we simply really not just have to work hard in Osceola to achieve, but we have to be lucky to achieve. So that's kind of my pitch for do both if you can. If you can't, well, you know, I would say that one of the two is certainly very important.
Are we just defeating the purpose if we hire somebody for collections? We're gonna have to pay them 25, 30,000, and we turn around and the maximum we've ever gotten is 24,000. What's the point?
The point is that that person might not do just collections, and by removing collections from Elizabeth's plate, what she can do is stuff like victim witness coordination, which makes so much of our work in prosecuting cases more successful. The reality is a lot of times that when you don't have a dedicated victim witness coordinator, people just want to talk to the county attorney. or they are frustrated when things get continued because of how busy we are in court, or if Elizabeth doesn't have time to call somebody. These are things that increase outcomes of cases, and it's a reason why the majority of county attorney's offices have somebody who dedicates at least half of their time to this. Depending on how federal funding goes, we could get a grant for that and potentially hire somebody as a full-time employee who does part-time fine collection, and through a federally funded grant, if funding remains available, depending on how federal politics go, then does victim witness coordination with the other half of that grant, and you could end up actually funding that position from county money at maybe even less than half time.
I didn't know you could do that. Why haven't we done that before?
I mean, we've talked about doing that. I've brought it up before, and there hasn't been.
I've never heard it before in my life.
Okay. Well, it's been mentioned before, maybe not in the past few years, but that's, something that I've explored doing. So the reality is that it doesn't defeat the purpose, because you're probably not going to have somebody who just does only fine collection if they're part-time. They may be a full-time employee splitting duties, partially grant funded. You also have the reality that it gives Elizabeth time to do more things in her workday that aren't fine collection. And I can attest that that's a big part of what draws her time away from doing other tasks, because when she's gone at lunch, or if she has a doctor's appointment, or if she has something else, pretty much every time that she's gone for an hour or so, I'll get at least one phone call. Hey, I need to set up a payment plan. Hey, how do I get my driver's license back? Hey, how do I do this? I really don't directly access and execute on those things except to approve plans when needed, right? And so that's a big part of her picking up the phone time, being on the phone, not working on other things. So it does add value to the office because it lets her function better. And the other thing I'll tell you is the max we've ever collected is that number that you mentioned, but having somebody who can actually get everybody on a program, who has time to go on certain computer programs and databases that can tell you if somebody has a job, so you can pick the low-hanging fruit more efficiently. It makes this a sort of operation where you could collect significantly more than that number you mentioned, Jerry. Because, like I said, in the 8 or so years that the fine collections person has been over at Lion doing that, they've collected well over, I think it's something like 900 grand, about 10% of which has gone to the county directly, and actually in some cases more goes to the county. I'd have to look at those numbers, but I'm not saying these people fully pay for themselves, and you have to look at full-time versus part-time equivalents, but it doesn't necessarily defeat the purpose.
My thoughts are, let's wait and see what's gonna cost us to get an attorney. That's my thoughts.
How do you mean that, or how does that play out? Wait and see. We have to identify what the county attorney's salary is going to be July 1.
We don't know if we even get anybody.
But if we leave it low, I think we'll have less. If we leave it where it's at, I think we'll have less interest.
I never said we were gonna leave it low.
And if we raise it, that still doesn't tell us where.
Whatever, I
I
think
know.
we should leave it like it is. That's my thoughts.
I'd like to take a week and think about it.
And we have discussed budget reviews or review budgets later in the agenda as well, but
Yeah.
we will consider those points as we review that, and likely have the item again next week, or have it as part of the budget review continuing next week.
Sounds good.
Does that sound reasonable?
Thank you.
Next item, possible closed session per Iowa Code 21.5, evaluate county engineer. Is there a request from the county engineer to utilize closed session?
We did have a discussion a few months ago, but if you'd like to discuss further, then yes, I would prefer that be done in closed session.
We have a potential contract agreement in place that reflects what was discussed previously. Is there a desire to discuss altering that? Or my opinion is if we're going to consider what's been worked on, that would need to remain in, consider action on it, would need to remain in open session. If we think we want alterations or have further discussions, then closed session would be warranted.
I'm okay with the contract.
If there's something you would like discussed in closed session, we certainly can use it, but
I have nothing further to discuss beyond the contract that was presented. If you'd like to discuss the contract, then yes, I prefer that be done in this session.
I guess maybe to highlight sections that were specifically addressed in the contract, do we want to utilize closed session briefly to point those out amongst ourselves? Is there interest to go into closed session?
I'd make a motion to accept it the way it is.
Motion by Schulte to approve the employment contract and agreement as presented. And the engineer is in agreement that what's presented is consistent with what was discussed previously.
Second it.
A motion by Schulte, support from Loring to give approval to the employment contract and agreement as drafted for the engineer. Any discussion concerning the contract that's before us? Hearing none, those in favor of approval signify with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. All right.
I'd like
Move
to thank the
on.
board for the contract extension. Thank you.
We would be looking at the engineer's budget for 25-26.
I apologize for not being able to present last week with everybody else. So as part of the budget, I had submitted a kind of a synopsis like I did last year, to kind of give a highlight of how I structure and build the budget, and where I see it going forward. So in general, the seven, and this is kind of broken down similar to the codes that the Iowa DOT requires that we file as well. So in the 7,000, the 7010 areas, that's pretty straight up, just straight up salaries for the office staff and travel and training. That's generally the engineers conference. There's a office managers conference as part of ISAC. And then there's a couple other days that are built in for other training opportunities that may present themselves throughout the year. For instance, in this case, I have planned to go to the spring ISAC conference because there's going to be a joint session between the engineers and the supervisors. Otherwise, I don't normally go to that.
Can you use those hours as part of your training? Don't you have to have
There
some
are
training
continuing
hours?
education requirements that I have to retain my license, and yes, those sessions that are at the Winter Engineers Conference, if you go every year, it's enough to do that. But I also do other trainings, and I do online trainings throughout the year when they present themselves. But yes, and there will also be some continuing education credits at the spring ISAC as well. So yes, those do provide that service. The next is the 7100 series. That's roadway maintenance. That's the bulk of what we do combined with the 7200 series. Major projects that we're doing in that is generally our pavement maintenance. Also our snow and ice removal comes out of there. Any maintenance we do on culverts and bridges throughout the year, that gets all paid out of that series. We had planned to do a box culvert up in the Horton Township this past year, but then the flood tore up all of our plans for that. So we now are carrying that forward, and we'll do that this year. That may cost us another couple $100 in temporary construction easement because we'll have to pay for that right again, but that was a minor cost. We're going to be budgeting a lot of money for bridge maintenance in terms of additional erosion protection and other repair around culverts that were damaged by the flood. A lot of this does get reimbursed by FEMA, approximately 75% by FEMA, and we believe approximately 10% by the state. So we're looking at maybe 85%, but regardless, I would think at least 80% is going to get reimbursed. But in the end, we're going to have a better erosion protection around these culverts. And the ones that did have erosion protection stood up a lot better to that flood. The snow and ice removal is still set close to the $300,000 range. The first year I was here, previous engineers had taken advantage of some of the light winters like we're having right now, and they had dropped that budget down in the 150 range, and then we got burned bad. I would prefer to keep the budget closer to the 300,000 range, and if we have a light winter, we can spend the money in the spring is how I tend to work with that. Typically what we do is we'll go on a spending spree and buy pipe if we end up with a bunch of extra money because we're always in need of pipe and things like that. But regardless of that, most of the road categories have been reduced slightly. I'm pulling money here and there from the maintenance side of the budget, which will then be seen later on in the capital side of the budget because we are having to do some major replacements with the FEMA flood repair. So we still have to come up with our 15 to 20% of the costs of these things, and one of which is the bridge down by Poet. The 7200 series, that's where we have other things such as equipment and buildings. Huge piece of equipment that we're replacing is another maintainer, which was the one that we just took before you for a quote a couple of weeks ago. So that's now being built into the budget along with the plow for that maintainer. And then we're looking at getting a shouldering machine. Right now we use kind of a hodgepodge shoulder machine that works off the back of a truck. This machine would actually mount on one of our maintainers, and then trucks would back up and load material into it, and we think it's going to be a much more efficient way to do our shouldering. Buildings wise, there's very little in the buildings. I just put some money in there for general maintenance. So you're going to see a large reduction percentage wise in that category because we've been spending the last 2 years building a building. So now that's done.
How much did that building actually cost us?
Just slightly over 1.2 million is what it cost. The cost to us was about 90K. So things that were in that building that were not there before were we added 3 additional garage doors that were not in the original building. And the insurance felt that since the fire was more or less in the southern part of that building and there was kind of a demarcation wall in the old building, they felt that the slab on the north part of the building was salvageable, and we disagreed. And we didn't want to deal with every time there was any kind of humidity, the smell of that fire coming up through that slab. So we paid the cost to rip out the northern slab and replace it. That was about $50,000, and then the garage doors were about $40,000. So that was our cost to that building, but we think we got a better building for doing that. I don't know how you would have tried to mix and match the slab with the old slab, and that just would have been horrible. Drainage assessments, these are actually a carry forward from those large projects, the Joint District 3. I expected to have them in this year's budget, but it looks like they're not going to actually hit my budget till next year, so I'm simply carrying those forward. Construction, we have the bridge F10 replacement is coming up, and we're programming some money for right-of-way acquisition and to do that job. Otherwise, that project is being let through the state, so that won't really see our budget. That's all our highway bridge program dollars that are managed by the state, and they never actually hit our budget. But we do pay for the right-of-way acquisition ourselves. We have the 2 culverts on Oak Hill Avenue, one north of town and one just north of Ashton. Those were ones that were pipes that were kind of washed out by the FEMA flood, but we're replacing them with box culverts, so they're getting put in the capital plan because they, regardless of them being a replacement, they are considered capital improvement because we're bettering the pipe that was out there. And the same thing with the bridge replacement, even though it's a replacement due to flood, we have to put that in the capital program. Now these are going to show as local funding, and we'll have to have local funding for the budget authority and then get payments back from FEMA. For the most part, as long as we have good cost estimating with FEMA, we should be able to get some money up front with that, so we shouldn't have to cash flow it all the way ourselves, but we do have enough reserves that we can cash flow this project. So I guess in summary, I tried to kind of look at the budget both with and without some of these weird things that have hit the budget in the last few years, such as the shop fire, and try to look at taking out the programming I'm doing just to cover the FEMA work. And the budget more or less is about $70,000 or $80,000 over programmed, which is okay. We have enough reserves to do that. It's not something I want to do every year. Previous years, previous engineers had over budgeted by as much as $300,000 to $400,000. That's certainly not sustainable, but over budgeting slightly is not generally a problem because in general we don't spend all of our budget every year. So even though we may over budget a bit, we'll not really spend that and really even hit the reserves. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any other further questions on the budget.
We don't have possession of that new grader yet, do we?
Oh, that was just a quote. So we will not, we ordered it.
Yeah.
And it's expected, actually, they are not as backed up as trucks. And they actually could have gotten it to us in a couple of months, but we told them we can't take possession until July.
Oh, I just see Melvin's had a cat down there, not the John Deere, because it was in disrepair or?
The John Deere is again in disrepair.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't think you got one, but I've seen that cat down there.
The transmission is going out in that John Deere. And we did discuss that with Cat, and they agreed to take the trade-in
I remember that.
with the busted transmission. They said they already had a buyer for it even. So someone's going to mix and match it, make it whole. I'd like to also add that not in this year's budget, but in next year's budget, we're not going to have a need for a major equipment piece of purchase. We typically buy maintainers every other year, and then we buy trucks, but we've got some nice trucks now. So we're not gonna be needing a truck next year. So we will probably be looking at building a new cold storage building on the Sibley yard. We've been, I guess, mix and matching and running different places, fairgrounds and other places, and over the years to try to do cold storage, and we're just gonna build something. Part of that will be negotiating with the city of Sibley to get the right-of-way cleaned up on the south yard. In years past, when the railroad abandoned that area, they abandoned it to the county. And the county, when the city, I guess, was doing their path down there, the county just gave them like all the land, not just the land where the path is. So there's actually a big arc and triangular piece that we need to try to get back. So I started discussing that with the city.
Anything further specific to the engineer's budget, gentlemen?
Not for me.
Thank you. As in years past, I'll have to now convert this into the DOT format, and I'll be bringing forward kind of a DOT budget / capital improvement program, which is the DOT format, but it will mirror this budget exactly.
It has to be done by April 15th, or do they change it? They didn't.
They've never changed the date on that. I know that they changed the law on regular budgets, didn't change the law on DOT budgets. So in the end, the DOT budget gets approved before the final budget, but it will mirror this exactly. It just puts it in their format. So be on the lookout for that in the future. Thank you.
Do we want to consider departmental approval? Thinking with some of the other offices where we've had discussion and some differing opinions, do we want to go department by department and give approval? And just thinking, in the past, I've voted against the overall budget, but if we give a specific department review, if the board approves it, then we'd move forward on the whole thing as a whole. Or do we want to wait for further reviews?
It's not critical for my budget this time, but as Rochelle says, I do have to have the DOT budget, which is on my budget, approved in April. I can wait till like the end of March to bring my budget forward, the DOT version forward.
Well, I'm gonna look this over again, but nothing stuck out at me.
All right. Thank you. Next item is consider approval of appointment for Kylie Herrera as the dispatcher jailer. I don't know what you guys thought. I did mention to the sheriff that when there are new hires, it might be nice if they would be willing to stop in when the appointment's made, just to put a face with the name. But if that's not something any of you desire, that doesn't need to become
I think that
practice.
worked here or just gonna start.
She started
She has
training
started
already.
training.
Yeah, and her pay is $44,426. I think she just started last week, I believe, training.
It'd be kind of nice to put a face with the name.
I would like that, yeah.
Relay that to him. Do we have a motion for approval of the appointment?
I make that motion.
Motion by Helmer, support from Schulte. Any discussion, further discussion concerning approval of the appointment? Hearing none, those in favor signify with aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. We've received an engagement letter from Piper Sandler. Consider approval of the engagement letter concerning the general obligation capital loan notes for 2025.